Welcome once again to Dr. J PhD. Today we will be talking about the Spartans once again. I know many people out there super interested in the story of Sparta, and as you may know or may not know, I got my PhD studying to the Spartans and their economy and other aspects that you would love to know. But today it's gonna be a little bit different since, as you know, I'm kind of like promoting one of my favorite books. It's called Sparta, and as you know, I self published this book like 10 years ago, which was really interesting. It's been very well sold. And once again, I'm here to tell you something about it, but not directly regarding to the book, but also a bunch of stories, a bunch of curiosities, right, regarding to the Spartans, one of the most famous ancient civilization cities that people really love to hear about. Of course, the first thing you gotta do before to get started is to tell you guys this is my author.amazon.com page, and this is the book. As you see, I also have this book in Spanish, but if you are watching me from the United States or any other native English country, whatever, you guys can find this book. The link will be in the description below of this video. And of course, I hope you really enjoy it. I mean, as you see, it's the third edition of this book, which means that, like I said, I mean, people have loved this book and many people have bought it. And of course, I had to compromise myself to re-edit the book since it's been 10 years now since I wrote it. And I think that I want to make some improvements to it, but it's still very, very interesting. So with that being said, I'm going to start off by saying Sparta has been known in history for, has gone down in history for having or bringing to the world one of the fiercest warriors in history, which is kind of true, of course, not going to deny that stuff, but let me tell you something. Sparta also has a lot of stories, a little bit contradictory stories, a little bit unknown stories. I want to tell you something about it, and this is going to be the 5 facts or the 5 stories that you might not know about Sparta that you really want to hear about. First and foremost, the agoge, the education of the Spartans, the foundation of a civilization that, in my opinion, was one of the most brutal systems, if it happened actually, one of the most brutal systems that we've ever seen in history. I mean, the agoge is not only something that happened in Sparta, right? Other civilizations, other cities in ancient history also had some different education systems, but very similar to the agoge. Why is that? Because in the old times, a lot of people believed that if you make rough to the kids, then you will have great warriors, right? And the Spartans were not the first ones. As you know, the Romans or the Persian Empire, and under the Persian Empire, of course, a lot of different cities and different towns and different people, different cultures that also had this kind of education, brutal education, by the way, that first started when you were kind of like 5 years old. This is not pretty clear, but at some point in between 5 and 7 years old, you were taken out of your house and taken to somewhere to be kind of like trained and well prepared for making you stronger, more resilient, more, I don't know, just rougher, smarter, in different ways for you to become the best version of the best warrior ever seen. One of the main mysteries is, were they deliberately like unnerved? Were they pushed to steal food or whatever it was for them to become smarter, rougher, and all that stuff? We actually don't know yet, but some sources of the ancient Greece, like for example, Xenophon or Thucydides, they would tell you something about it. For example, I still remember Xenophon praising all the time the education system of Sparta versus the super soft and smooth education in Athens, where everything was all revolving around philosophy and learning stuff like math and geometry, stuff like that, but not to make the kids like fierce or strong enough, right, to become real warriors, right? So that's why we heard about the Egoji in other sources as well, but they are kind of like all the time romanticizing this thing, like kind of like idealizing the education of Sparta, when in reality, when we read to different other philosophers, for example, Aristotle, or for example, Plato, or other writers of the ancient times, you actually portrayed a picture of the education system that doesn't fit the narrative, right? It's kind of like they were just brutal because they were brutal, they were poorer than Athens, and this was the only way they knew to make the kids stronger. Relying on a belief that if you push kids, if you are mean to them, if you really, I know, just if you make them go crazy, they will become smarter in no time, stronger in no time, like fearless, like reckless, stuff like that, right? And that is another different story, another different another different portrait of the Spartans, right? A completely different story, since we've heard about their, how brave they were, but in this kind of cases of these kind of authors, they said, no, this is not, or this was not the way to go. Actually, this was just like this because they were brutal, they were uncivilized, they were completely crazy. For example, they also point out the relations in between grown-ups and kids, right? Like it happens nowadays in other parts of the world that I don't want to mention, but you all know that, right? In the Far East, there are so many countries and cultures that still believe that grown-ups and kids can, either marry or have relations and stuff like that. So that is the mystery, or where the mystery relies at. That the egogy, or the education system, it was kind of like not a system in itself, but kind of like something a little bit more complicated. I'm not gonna tell you more, but I think the very best word for that is kind of like complicated. So let's move on and let's talk about story number 2, which is about the role of women in Sparta, which is kind of like unique, since in the ancient Greece, what we've heard about the women, the role of women, and what did they do in ancient civilizations like Greece, if that was so important or less important, or what actually was the role of women in, either Athens versus Sparta, for example. Whereas in Athens, we do know women didn't have any kind of relevant position in society. Actually, they were in the gyneceium all the time, like in the kitchen, basically. In Sparta, it was a little bit different according to sources. And in Sparta, they said the empowerment of women was so crazy freaking high or big that these women, they actually own their own land, they own their own states, they own their own businesses, kind of like they were completely independent from men, which is kind of funny because men, among the homoioi, they were kind of like free Spartans, right? They didn't even have to work, they didn't even have to trade, they didn't even have to do anything or craft stuff for selling, because that was the task of the slaves, right? So whereas the free people could do pretty much every single thing they wanted. It is true though that women apparently had any kind of not only empowerment, but kind of like super high role in the society of Sparta, which apparently was important for them because they concentrated in their hands the 90% of the land. I mean, this is something, passages and phrases we've read in all the ancient authors and histories and stuff like that. So that's why I guess, yes, it is true, women had a very important role within Sparta. And of course, in the education system, as you know, women had another important role, trying to educate their kids according to the law, according to the Spartan rules, according to tradition and things like of that nature, right? In my opinion, women were really prominent in this society, but we cannot go crazy either. I mean, they were under the rule of Sparta, under the rule of Lycurgus, and of course they couldn't even skip it. Although in reality, they probably overlooked a bunch of these rules, right? For example, there is something coming to my mind right now, a story that it is told, where all the Spartans, I think it was during the war, but I don't know what the war was against, but all the men were out of the city, and the women took advantage to have relations with some of the slaves and stuff like that. And then when the men came back, they found out they had been cheating and stuff like that, and there was kind of like a bunch of problems, but it wasn't like big deal. It's something like, yeah, they did, but they didn't have like big consequences or something like that. So that is what makes you think women had a relevant roles in Sparta. Number 3 in this video will be about the helots, or the slaves. As you know, the most of the helots come from Messenia. Messenia is in the southwest of the Peloponnesian Peninsula, right? And this land, all throughout the years, were conquered or seized or invaded by the Spartans, who took these people or enslaved the most of these people to work for them, so they could maintain their system of free people, right? And then all these kind of tasks and trade and other, profitable tasks would be performed by these guys. But the funny thing is, they were kind of like slaves, so there was no other way for them to be free, apparently, especially at first. All throughout the years, though, we see how more and more helots are freed by their owners, by the Spartans, just because they had a massive problem, like in these days, massive problem with newborns. They were kind of like exhausting the newborns, the new people in Sparta. They are declining, right? And they are running out of people, literally running out of real Spartans or original Spartans, and the helots kind of like took over. The funny thing, though, is that in so many sources we come across passages and phrases where they claim that there were a bunch of these slaves that actually not only dedicated themselves to trade and they ran businesses, but they also became rich. They were kind of like, apparently, allegedly, even richer than some Spartans, right? Because they were able to, like I said, they were crafting stuff and selling it. They were putting things to sell or for selling. There was no problem at all, since the commerce was not seen like something really to brag about. It was not something like, okay, I'm a super rich, trader. I'm a super rich, commerce guy. No, it wasn't that way. For Spartans, the most important was the war and become one of the most important warriors within your city and pay honor to your city, complying with all the rules from Sparta. So commerce was not a thing. In Athens, though, it was a completely different story. For example, Cleon, the guy who fought the Spartans in Sphacteria and Pylos and the Peloponnesian War, at first, he actually became rich because of commerce. So as you see, in the imaginary of both cities, they had like different perspectives and different roles and different ideas about wealth, about money, and about pretty much everything. So helots, yeah, there's a rumor that says Spartans, to become kind of like grown-ups, to give this leap from childhood to the adult life, they had kind of like to, or they were sent to murder or kill or fight these helots with just their, bare, in kind of like bear punch or bare hands fights and stuff like that. But that's not, I'm not gonna say completely accurate, since I'm not going to deny that it happened at some point, but it's kind of like complicated to assume that these guys, it was kind of like a ritual for them to become grown-ups. It might have happened or not, right? But what is very true is that over the time, helots and slaves, they actually lived way better than Spartans, because not all of them, but a bunch of them, they were kind of like, they became richer than Spartans, and they actually were better off in their lives than the Spartans would have been in their whole lives. So we gotta understand that the helots were not this kind of like 100% slave civilization or enslaved culture, because they were under the rule of Spartans and they were kind of like doing the job they didn't want to do. They were, there were differences, there were problems with helots. They revolted a bunch of times as well. They were actually outnumbered to the Spartans a bunch of times as well, and they took advantage of it. And there were a lot of situations where these revolutions of the Helots in different chapters of the history of Sparta, it happened and they had to take care of it. And actually it was a concern all throughout the years for the Spartans all the time. So we do not, or we shouldn't think about or towards the Helots like they were enslaved, they didn't say anything, they were quiet, they were compliant, they were, no. These guys took advantage every single time they had a chance. And of course, they were a kind of group like a little bit more complicated than the history is portraying them all the time. Of course, in this video, I will also refer as a number 4, the Battle of Thermopylae, right? The most infamous battle of the Spartans, just because Leonidas were there and the 300 Spartans battling to the super massive largest army in the history, which was the Persian Empire. And we see it today through our lens, like the West against the East, like Christians against the Muslims and stuff like that. But it's kind of like a little bit different, so we don't have to take it like to go crazy and make a lot of excuses to justify a lot of things that don't make any sense. But let me tell you something. Along with these 300 Spartans, which is in my opinion very remarkable what they did, and actually if you've ever been in this super straight off Thermopylae, I've been to there a couple times. I love the place, I love the surroundings. It was in 2008 my last visit, and it was beautiful, man. You can feel the vibe, you can feel the sensation, what they did up there, what they did or what they felt actually when they were there. You see the surroundings, you can kind of like imagine what happened, where the Persians came from, where the Spartans came from, where they got stuck, where they got lost. I mean, everything, right? So I really highly recommend for you guys to go there and kind of like portray in your mind this battle, because it was so exciting to me, and it's probably will be exciting for you guys if you set foot in Greece in the Strait of the Thermopylae. So it's just it's not a strait, it's actually straight, a path, a little trail, whatever you want to call it. But the point is, alongside these 300 Spartans, there were also 700 Thespians, right? As you know, Greece was divided in different small cities, state cities or city-state. For example, Thespia, Boeotia, Argos, Sparta, Athens, and all those, and way more. But the Thespians were the only ones who remained along the Spartans. So why do we only remember to the Spartans? In my opinion, it's just because the myth making and these kind of stories that go throughout or go down the history, just because they had something special, unique that made them made history. Actually, I don't know, but I thought, man, we have to be honest here and say that along these 300 Spartans, there were other Greeks that also remained to fight the Persian Empire, right? And this is kind of like 480 before Christ. So it is remarkable enough for me to let the people know, just in case you guys didn't know, because you only watched the movie. And it was, I mean, I love the movie, nothing against that, of course, but sometimes we have to distinguish between reality and the movie and Hollywood and all that stuff. But I love the movie. I mean, I really love it. Nothing, like I said, against that. But yeah, it is not true they all ran out or escaped. All the Greeks escaped the place except for the Spartans. It wasn't kind of like 100% accurate, right? So, but I would say, yeah, 300 Spartans and 700 Thespians. And this kind of battle lasted for quite long. From my understanding, they resisted there as long as they could. It was, brave enough for them to be there. Kudos to all of them, of course. But yeah, I mean, it's not only the Spartans, but the Thespians as well. And coming down to the last point, which is the number 5, let me tell you something which is about the decline, or actually the end of Sparta. When we say the end, it's not the end of the city. Sparta remained there for centuries, and actually it's still a real place, right? But the thing is, this kind of glorious past or these kind of glorious times for Sparta came to an end all of a sudden overnight in 371 before Christ, when they were defeated in the Battle of Leuctra, right, against the Thebans or Tebas. I don't know in English how you guys call it, but they were defeated, and all of a sudden their power got like lost. I mean, it got out and came to an end, and the Sparta we already knew, it was gone, completely gone. But what is the reason for it? Well, let me tell you something. It is not true, though, that the Spartans won the War of the Peloponnesus or the Peloponnesian War just because they were stronger or smarter or outnumbered to Athens or to the Athenians. They won, and listen to me, guys, pay attention to my words. They won because the alliance with the Persian Empire. Yeah, believe it or not, the Spartans ended up aligning with or siding or teaming up with the Persian Empire for them to win, since Sparta never had a big naval power, right? They were all about the infantry. They were all about the soldiers. They were all about to fight in land, and they had no clue how to fight the Athenians in the sea. So what happened was, at some point, Ahasuerus, the king Ahasuerus, he decided to side or team up with the Persian Empire, since the Persian Empire was actually funding, not only with money, but with ships and boats and stuff like that, to the Spartans for them to win the war against Athens. So that is the only reason why they won the war, to be in total honesty with you guys. I love the Spartans, but the truth is the truth, right? So what happened after that is that they could remain like the superpower of Greece just because of the money of the Persian Empire. However, they couldn't ever stop or calm down the different kind of revolutions, kind of riots that happened all throughout Greece in between the different cities that they really wanted to become the next new power in Greece, right? Like the next leaders of Greece. Of course, Athens did it a couple times, the Thebians or Tebas as well, and other cities in Greece. So they were kind of like revolting all the time and fighting against Sparta every time they had a chance to it. But yeah, and the money of the Persian Empire got out. I mean, they exhausted it. I think that the Persian Empire stopped the funding of Sparta, and they had to figure it out. And of course, they didn't figure it out. And of course, they came to an end as the superpower we already knew. So that is what explains that they won the Peloponnesian War in a very difficult situation, because they were rescued by the Persian Empire and they could face off to the Athenians in another way, right? Like battling them and fighting them either in land or in the sea. So that's why they won. And they tried to keep their hegemony or hegemon, whatever you want to call it, their power over Greece for 20 to 30 years, but no longer than that. And after that, we saw to Philippos and Alexander of Macedon coming up, and it was actually the right substitution of the Spartan power all the way to the Hellenism and Alexandros and all that stuff that you already know. But this was the end of the glorious Sparta, and this is why they came off, or they actually disappeared, or their power was gone, or you know what the reason was for their decline. They were unable to adapt to the new times. They were never ever become a kind of like trading or commerce superpower. They never made money. They never fought for money. They were never meant to make money. And that is where the problem came out, because Athens reinvented itself from an agricultural city all the way to a commerce city, to a more allowing to other people to commerce, to trade within Athens, to have land, to buy stuff, to sell stuff. And that is something Sparta never admitted. And that's why this lack of reinvention is what, in my opinion, costed them for them to disappear from history. And that is mainly the reason why it happened. So I'm so sorry, guys, but Sparta was what it was, and they never pretend to become another city. They never thought it was good for them, and that's why, in my opinion, they lost their power. So I hope you guys really enjoyed the video. Of course, let me encourage you all to buy my book, The Battles of Sparta, The Battles That Forged the Legend, where I talk about the 11 most important battles all throughout history of Sparta, where you will see numbers, facts, non-facts, myths, and names and things of that nature. Okay, so down low in the description below you will find the link to the book. I hope you guys like the video. See you in the next one.